Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Islamic Calling podcast. Recently, I actually saw a debate between brother Kenny Bomer and Matt Dillahunty. So basically, the debate topic was, is Islam true? So I saw this debate and I feel like there were mistakes made from the side of Matt Dillahunty. I'm going to explain, inshallah, what went wrong. So let's take a look at the debate.
In the next verse, it says, "And he turned to the sky when it was smoke, and said to it, he said to it and the earth, come willingly or unwillingly. And they said, we come willingly. Obviously, everything in submission to our Creator. And this brings upon the fifth point. It's miraculous that was revealed in the Chronicle 1400 years ago. The universe initiated from smoke, as Allah just mentioned. And we see this to be manifest and true. Over 1400 years ago, before modern technology could prove it, Allah described the universe as being initiated from smoke. And in 1991, in the New York Times, they published an article titled, The Big Bang, Mostly Smoke. Allah says in the Quran, in the heavens we constructed with strength, and indeed, we are its expander. 1400 years prior. And in 1925, we see that the American astronomer Edwin Hubble, you can read about this on Hubble's Law Explained in StudySmarter.us.
So there's a lot of controversy regarding this argument. This argument has been made famous by Dr. Zakir Naik and some other people before him, and it's been facing some controversy by certain Muslim duat and YouTubers. Mostly the controversy is regarding something along the line of, science changes constantly. We cannot use these arguments anymore. Blah blah blah, right? And I can already see some of this kind of like philosophy bros, so I like to call them. So this philosophy bros, they're gonna take issue with this. They're gonna, start cringing at this. Oh, I can't
believe this guy is using science, this kind of like outdated arguments about Islam, right?
Science is a liar sometimes.
But I disagree. I think this kind of like arguments, I think they're very effective, and I think they can be philosophically sound as well. If these arguments are made based on Quranic verses that are sound in terms of the science of tafsir, and the science itself is something that has been proven, that has been observed, you can make this argument in this way or in some other way. This is basically the argument in a nutshell, right? Premise one: if the Quran talks about things that were not known by humans at that time, then the Quran is not written by humans. Now, this premise is very easy and simple to understand. So if you have a book, or any book, any ancient books or whatever, if that book talks about things that were not known by people at the time, it logically follows that chances are this book is not written by humans. You can apply this criteria to any book, unless the book has some internal problems like contradictions and whatnot. In that case, of course, that would be an exception. But in general, I think if you look at the Quran specifically, which doesn't have any contradiction or any other problems, then I think you can easily apply this criteria on the Quran, which is that if the Quran does talk about things that were not known by human beings at the time, then it's not written by human beings, right? It's a very simple logic, very easy to understand. Premise two would be that the Quran does talk about things that were not known by humans at the time. And this is true, as Brother Kenny Bomer was explaining, because we have manuscripts of the Quran from that time period. So we have historical evidence that shows that the Quran did come from that time period. So the conclusion would be, therefore, the Quran is not written by human beings, right? Which means if you use Occam's razor, then it's very likely that it's the word of God, right? So the very simple argument, which is the point of it, is that it's going to bring up evidences and evidences one after the other to make a very compelling case for Islam, right?
Now one could simply say, but this is just a coincidence. However, that would be a very bad objection. Let's say you have a dice, and every time you roll the dice you get the number 1. Now sure, the first few times it might just be a coincidence. However, if it keeps happening over and over again, then that gives you a good reason to believe something else is going on here. Same thing with the Quran in this argument. If the Quran is accurate despite odds in so many cases, then it logically follows then that it is not written by human beings. Now a second objection would be the scientific error argument. Opponents of this argument would often bring up instances of places where the science and the Quran doesn't match. Now remember what I said earlier, in order for this argument to work it has to complete 2 criteria. 1, this explanation of the verse has to be based on the science of tafsir. In Islam we have a way we interpret verses. It has to match that criteria. Almost 90% of the scientific error arguments would fall in this criteria, which makes the argument a strawman, thus it has no effect on this argument. Now the rest 10% cases the science itself is problematic or shaky, and it's not something we can observe or measure, or there are debates in the scientific community and competing hypotheses.
So the scientific error argument would always get refuted by this 2 criteria, therefore it won't affect the argument.
So it becomes extremely logical for you to accept this position that, Quran is the word of God.
But you also can't point to the Quran to demonstrate that the Quran is true. That's ultimately certain. That is the book that is making the claims, and you would need, it can record the evidence as well, but you would need external confirmation of evidence. You can't confirm claims.
Okay, so here we go. Here's the first strawman. First of all, the argument has nothing to do with the Quran saying the Quran is true. Okay, like for example, if you read Charles Darwin's book, and we know that Charles Darwin's book says that evolution is true, then I could also make the same argument and say that, you cannot say that evolution is true because that's circular, right? Because Charles Darwin in his book says that evolution is true, therefore you're saying evolution is true. But the problem here is the devil is in the detail, right? So yes, Charles Darwin's book is saying that evolution is true, but he's bringing evidence for it, right? He's telling you to test it yourself. This is something you can test yourself, right? So the book itself is making arguments. Okay, so when the Quran is saying things that are not known by human beings at the time, then it is actually telling us to test things outside of itself. And when we do test things outside of itself, it turns out to be true. So how is that circular? But that's not a circular argument. So here, let's look at this argument, right? In his mind, this is what he's saying. Premise 1, Quran says it's the word of God. Conclusion, therefore, it's the word of God because that's what the Quran says, right? No one made this argument. Like literally no one said this. This is not the actual argument. This is the argument I'm making. Right, and in this is not circular in any way, shape, or form. How is this circular? This conclusion here, the Quran is not written by humans. Why is this in the premise? So in the conclusion, we're saying the Quran is not written by humans, but the premise says if the Quran talks about things that were not known by humans, then that would prove that Quran is not written by humans. So it's the first premise is basically a condition, okay, which is different than the conclusion, which is that the Quran is not written by humans. Right, so these are two completely different things. We see that it is true that Quran does talk about things that were not known by humans, right? We know that to be true, and therefore the other condition gets proven by this, right? Then we see that if this condition is true, then this condition also has to have to be true, right? Because if P equals Q and it is P, then it has to be Q, right? So it's not like there's no circular reasoning here. Like, what is he talking about?
It has not been demonstrated to be true. I'm not convinced whether or not it's ultimately falsifiable, so it would be a mistake to say that something is false if you can't show it's falsifiable. So what are the standards of evidence that we're going to use? If you're going into a courtroom, in some of those courtrooms, it might be beyond a reasonable doubt. In others, it might be to a preponderance of the evidence. But as far as I can tell, Islam doesn't even meet the lowest standards. Claims about the supernatural aren't testable. They don't even rise to the...
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Claims about the supernatural are not testable. And no one said anything about supernatural. Like, what are you talking about? We're talking about things that we can test, right? The argument is literally talking about scientific facts that has been demonstrated. So this has nothing to do with the unseen. Unseen is something that comes after, right? Like, for example, again, like we would go back to the analogy of the calculator. Like, if the calculator is constantly giving you good results, then of course they're going to think that, going to give you the accurate result in the next time. You're definitely not going to say that, the calculator is going to be wrong and never going to use the calculator after using it once. No one thinks like this.
Now some people who don't understand how analogical reasoning works might say things like, but a calculator and a religious book is not the same. Yeah, no one is saying they are the same. The point of analogical reasoning is to show the logical consistency or the inconsistency of an idea or argument. If you are willing to put your faith in something like the calculator based on the fact that it has helped you solve some math problems, then it becomes logically justified to believe that it can help solve other math problems as well. Same thing with the Quran. If the Quran describes nature in an accurate way in many cases, then it becomes logically justified to believe it'll give accurate description of nature in other cases as well. This is how belief in the unseen and other things also become logically justified. At the end of the day, they are both about having faith. However, this is logically justified and reasonable faith. This is not blind faith or fanaticism.
Do this and expect to get acquitted. You're probably, unfortunately, more likely to receive psychiatric care and evaluation. That doesn't mean that what you said was false, and it doesn't mean that you're delusional, but it does mean that you're believing.
Wait, so you need a psychiatric evaluation if you make a sound logical argument? Okay.
So let's try this. My understanding is that from the standpoint of Islam, the purpose of existence is to worship God. How can you show that's true? If I have a purpose for my life, and my parents have a purpose for my life, and a God has a purpose for my life, and a government has a purpose for my life, how do we know which of those purposes is true?
How do you decide the purpose of something? If something is created to do a certain thing, then that is its purpose. If a phone is created so people can talk, then that is its purpose. Same way, if Allah Almighty created us so that we listen to Him and worship Him, then that is our purpose. If you don't recognize your purpose, then there is no difference between you and a phone that doesn't send or receive calls.
It says in this next quote says that all life began in water is also a conclusion to which our latest knowledge in biological science points. And so,
Okay, so basically, Brother Kenny, he's talking about the verse in the Quran where it says everything is made of water. In this instance, I think Brother Kenny is wrong, because I think the water here is referring to something else. The objection that Matt brings up is actually so stupid and fallacious that I feel like I need to kind of like point this out.
the science is showing that all created living things were created from water. No, it's not. Yeah, but this is what
No, it's not.
He says that all living things are not created from water. I mean, majority of our cells are made of water, but okay.
I just read it. You read it, and I listened to it and wrote it down. Yeah, because protoplasm isn't made of water. It depends on water. It depends on water.
Yeah, it says water is the most abundant molecular in cells, accounting for 70% or more of total cell mass. Okay.
We're going to massage this. You don't get to say the Quran says everything's made of water, and then say science says it depends on water, because it depends on water.
No, it's made of water. 70% of your cells are made of water.
No, that's not wrong, because it says on page 15 of the source that I mentioned, the direct quote here is living protoplasm always contains a large amount of water.
Contains water.
Exactly.
That's not made of water.
It
You understand the makeup of a cell.
Right.
The structure of a cell is not water. It can contain water.
It needs the water.
It can contain
Otherwise-
water.
Hold on. So basically, he's saying that if there's a majority, like for example, let's take a look at this. Okay, this cell phone, right? This cell phone, what is it made of? What is this cell phone made of? Is it made of glass? Is it made of steel? Is it made of, like, I don't know, wires? Like, what is it made of? If I say that this phone is made of glass, is that a false statement? No. If I say this is made of, this kind of like steel or plastic, is that false? No. It is made of glass. It is made of steel. They're all part of it. Just because Quran is only mentioning one aspect of it, that doesn't mean it's neglecting everything else. It's mentioning one aspect of it. Okay, that doesn't make it false. That doesn't make the argument unsound or like invalid in any way, shape, or form. So basically, here again, Matt Dillahunty is committing a logical fallacy. It's known as the fallacy of division. So basically, this logical fallacy is saying that because the entire thing have a certain property, the individual parts of it also have to have that property. Not necessarily, because the entirety can have a property that is different than the majority of it, right? Or some parts of it, right? That doesn't make the statement that is saying that this part, this thing is made of this thing, false. Like, for example, I can say that this cell phone is made up of, like steel or plastic, right? That wouldn't be a false statement. You could say it's not only made of steel and plastic. Same thing with the Quran. The Quran is not saying that the human body is made of only of water. No one is saying that. It's saying that it's made of this one thing. That doesn't mean it's the only thing. But again, to be fair to Matt, I don't think this is a good argument on Brother Kenny's part, because I think his interpretation of the verse is wrong. So this is a wrong interpretation. But if his interpretation was correct, then this argument would be sound.
I came up with an example. What if there was let me pick another one that is definitely not in the Quran, so that you can turn your head away from that book. If the book says, I jumping Jehoshaphat create poop, does the existence of poop confirm that jumping Jehoshaphat created poop?
See what you're doing. You're
No one is saying that. This is such a bad straw man. Like, what the hell?
that 1400 years ago.
Jesus H. Christ.
Hold on.
No.
Bear with me.
It's about logical fact.
And this is why Brother Kenny is constantly mentioning. But I feel like Brother Kenny, what he should have done is pressed him on the fact that, okay, you're saying this is the argument. Where did I make this argument? When, right? And this is the thing. This is another reason why I don't like live debates. When you're having live debates, oftentimes you cannot like see kind of like the fallacies your opponents are making, right? So you can like make like these mistakes, which is why you should like take your time and analyze the arguments, right? This is clearly a straw man. That's not the argument.
I wrote an entire
What are you trying to do?
This is Logic 101. This is any first-year logic student will understand this fallacy.
Yeah, anyone would understand this fallacy except you, apparently, because you yourself is making a logical fallacy. Yourself is misrepresenting the argument. And this guy is supposed to be, preparing students about logical fallacy. He supposedly teaches logical fallacies in universities. If I were those universities, I would fire you.
This is the actual argument and it has nothing to do with what Matt Dillahunty said.
But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Inshallah, I'll see you again next time. By the way, if you guys like the video, then please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and definitely please subscribe to the channel. That would mean a lot. And if you want to support the channel, Patreon, YouTube, and all that. So yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Thank you guys for watching. That's